Thank you for watching Scary Bear Attacks. If you like this episode, please remember to hit the like button and leave a comment or two, then subscribe and click on the bell to receive notifications of whenever we release new videos. Also, please remember to share them to your social media. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us to a island just off the coast of Alaska, near a creek called Fort Arm. The streams here are packed with 80,000 migrating coho salmon seasonally, making their way upstream to ensure the success of their species by laying eggs in gravel beds to start the next generation. Alder and willow bushes nearly completely screen the banks along the creeks and streams where salmon are depositing their eggs, and beautiful flowers like fireweed, forget-me-nots, and the small flower paintbrush create an artistic tapestry that only God could design. According to the Fish and Game website, there are no moose on Oak Island, but there are Sitka black-tailed deer and Roosevelt elk, the latter of which are the standard population all along the northern portion of the west coast of North America. The king of the ecosystem in most places is the largest predator there, and in this case, it is the coastal brown bear. On August 19, 2021, around 5 p.m., 31-year-old Sitka resident Jess Coltharp was doing what he liked doing most, his job. They say if you do something you enjoy, you'll never have to work a day in your life, and Jess's life bore that axiom out each day. Jess was a vessel captain in his 14th year with the Alaska Fish and Game, surveying streams, counting salmon. This gives the government agency a projection of just how many salmon are returning from the ocean to spawn, and can influence future fishing seasons and regulations. It is important work, but not without its risks, as the surveyors have to walk through prime brown bear habitat and get very near to the bear's food source. Coltharp indicated that he has encounters with bears somewhere between 80 and 90 times each season, with only a small portion of those being at close range. Run that out over his tenure, and you can easily see how he has run into about 1,000 brown bears over the years. Given that brown bear attacks have a statistical rhythm to them, and you can easily see how the numbers are against a person never having a dangerous encounter, leading to injury or death. These odds are just about to catch up with Jess in a terrifying way. On the day in question, the men encountered 4 or 5 brown bears on their way to their destination. The bears did the typical thing and hurried along their way, never to be seen again. The area the surveyors were headed to is a lake stream, which means that the stream emptied into a lake eventually. This sort of bottlenecks the bears, as they would typically spread out along a longer riverbank and tend to have more room to catch the fish they desire to eat. After spending their workday tallying up the fish in one stream, Coltharp and a volunteer named Ethan Christensen met up with boat deckhand Anthony Walloch. Coltharp and Walloch had grown up hunting and fishing, so being in this terrain and environment was nothing new to them. The location was a few hours by boat north of Sitka, but the term a few hours in Alaska could mean a very isolated location. Now, Jess and Walloch were both carrying Remington Model 870 12-gauge pump shotguns. These powerful firearms are standard issue to Alaska Fish and Game employees while doing field work. They were loaded with a devastating shell of Brennecke slugs for ammunition. In addition to the shotguns, the state of Alaska also trains its employees on wilderness safety and firearms training. Jess and Walloch both regularly trained at the gun range to be proficient and effective with the firearms they were issued. As the men headed back to their boat stashed a short distance from the creek, the men were laughing and talking. Coltharp was leading the way when the salmon berry bushes near them began to rustle. Coltharp recalls turning his head to chat with his companions when all hell broke loose. He could hear the brush popping and the unmistakable cacophony of a bear charge. The brush was too thick to see exactly where it was, but the bear emerged from only about 20 feet away, charging at him at full speed. The bear's body was pressed closely to the ground, and its claws dug into the soil to propel it toward Jess and the other men. In his past experiences, brown bears gave a good warning that they were in the area by popping their jaws and woofing. This was not the typical charge, as this bear gave no warning, no woofs, and no jaw pops. It simply powered its way through the brush, largely unencumbered by anything in its path. Given the proximity of the attack, Coltharp had just enough time to swing his firearm from his shoulder and open the action in an attempt to chamber a round. This effort was an exercise in futility because the bear covered the short distance before he was anywhere near ready to defend himself. The only reaction he could muster was to swing his torso to the side, hoping that Walloch was ready to fire the shotgun he was carrying. As Ethan dove for cover, Walloch's shooting lane opened up.
Unfortunately for Jess, the bear was quicker than any of the men's reactions, and it locked its massive jaws onto his right knee and slammed him to the ground onto his back. It then began violently shaking him from side to side, tearing his flesh and digging its teeth all the way to his bones. Jess managed to do the only thing he could do, which was to yell, "Shoot it! Shoot it! Shoot it!" repeatedly to his companions. Walloch was only about 5 yards behind Jess, and as the bear rushed his partner, he aimed his shotgun and had only a fraction of a second to consider the safety of this shot. He fired, and the bear rolled off of Jess. Just for good measure, Walloch pumped 2 more shots of lead pacification into the bear just to make sure it met its angels. Jess indicated that as soon as the first shot from the shotgun tore its destructive path, the bear released its grip on his knee. The terror and violence of the attack had the men glancing back and forth at each other, eyes widened with adrenaline. Jess immediately began to feel a state of shock set in, and his mind began to blur to escape the pain and fear. The frightening attack had left him confused and suffering, completely devoid of any way to comprehend the preceding events. Jess quickly jumped back to his feet, though, with the pain of his wounds numbed briefly by the adrenaline. He managed to stammer out a congratulatory, "Nice shot, thanks for saving my life," to Walloch. Hearing Jess's voice and seeing him standing on his feet brought a sense of peace, and his smile reassured his companions that he was all right, despite his terrible injuries. It only took a few seconds for Jess to feel the warm blood trickling down his leg, cooling his flesh. He was severely injured, and that reality set in on the men. They began to work up a rescue plan and placed a tourniquet on Jess's leg to staunch the bleeding. They retrieved their satellite phone from their backpacks and relayed the details to their boss, who arranged for a float plane to meet them only a half a mile away. As his partners watched Jess limp around the hill toward the pickup location, he couldn't help but reflect on the indelible impact this event would have on his life. He would not be forgetting this incident any time soon, if ever. Jess asked Walloch to take his photo as he rested on a log, giving the thumbs-up gesture, and his photo made the front page of the newspaper, the Sitka Sentinel. This and other images of the attack are too graphic to be viewed on YouTube and can be viewed by accessing the Patreon link below this video. Warning, they are graphic, and there is a dead bear there, so just so you know. To Jess, the picture relayed a message that there was no reason to freak out and to keep your spirits up no matter what circumstances you're in. Upon examination, the male brown bear stood around 7 feet tall and weighed around 500 pounds. Its canine teeth that dug into Jess's knee measured at 3 inches long. Fortune was on Jess's side that day, as Walloch had recently completed EMT training with the Sitka Fire Department and was quick to apply his newfound knowledge. His quick thinking not only saved Jess's life that day, but prevented his injuries from being as bad as they could have been. The men made it back to the pickup site with a float plane, and Jess was admitted to the Mount Edgecombe Medical Center for about a 2-hour visit to stabilize and treat his injuries. The next morning, he underwent a surgery to clean up the tissues around the wounds, and then he was flown to Anchorage to be seen by another doctor. That is when they stitched it up, as well as reconnected part of his quadriceps tendon running from his patella to his tibia. He completed several weeks of physical rehabilitation before he fully recovered for deer season in a few short months. Jess continually expresses thanks for his friend for his quick reactions that saved him from further injury or even death. He states that Walloch will never have to pay for his own drinks when Jess is around ever again. He continues, "I definitely owe that guy a lot, so he'll be reaping the benefits of that for quite a while." Walloch is quoted as saying, "If you're going camping or hiking, have your safety gear with you, and if you have safety gear, know how to use it properly and practice with it." Jess concludes with a statement discussing how people don't think that there's a bear ready to pounce on them each time they enter the woods, even though that is what happened to him. He states that being prepared for a confrontation is the most important aspect of traveling through bear country. No matter how many times you've traveled a trail, comfort can lead you to calamity. The worst thing that I've seen in all the facts and pictures of this story is that Jess is a Green Bay Packers fan. I could have sworn his favorite team was the Bears. After reviewing the facts surrounding this case, I'm left with a few questions that I would like to discuss with you. Do you think that the bear was guarding a carcass nearby, or that the bear was sleeping and the men surprised it? Was this attack a predatory attack? Would bear spray have prevented this bear attack? I will enjoy reading your comments, so please post yours in the comment section below and let's talk about it.
Thank you for watching Scary Bear Attacks. If you've enjoyed this episode, please consider clicking on the like button and clicking on the bell icon. We'll help you know when we post our new episodes. Posting our video links to your social media profiles furthers awareness, and it's fun. We slashed our prices in our merch store, linked below, so check out the bargains there while you shop. As a member of our human community, remember to adventure bravely and be careful out there, especially in bear country.
Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks.
Today's episode takes us to the beautiful trail system in the Chugach National Park, which surrounds Alaska's largest city, Anchorage. Just 20 miles south of the bustle of downtown, there is a mountainous hiker's retreat known as McHugh Creek Trail, which winds and climbs a little over 5 miles through dense brush to Rabbit Lake. The trail is crowded with very thick patches of ferns, devil's club, willow, and alder bushes, and at times hikers have to duck to get through. On the peaks you may see Dall sheep or mountain goats, and in the valleys spotting moose is very common. The dominant predators of the area include black and brown bears. By the way, this episode takes place just 10 miles from the location of another episode featured on this channel about Patrick Cooper, the 16-year-old boy who was killed in the Robert Spur Memorial Race on Bird Ridge. It is in this scenic and garden-like setting that our episode takes place today. Just after noon on Sunday, July 2nd, 1995, 77-year-old Marcy Trent was hiking with her son-in-law, 45-year-old Larry Waldron. They brought along Marcy's grandson and Larry's nephew, 14-year-old Art Abel, to spend some quality family time together enjoying the freedom of the outdoors. Larry was a popular saxophone player in the area and was training to run a marathon soon. His training partner Marcy was quite an accomplished runner. She had run in and completed over 70 marathons and logged over 70,000 miles running in her history. She had set a world record in the Boston Marathon in 1983 for the women's over 65-year-old category, as well as set a women's record in the Pikes Peak Marathon in Colorado. She was still as spry and competitive as ever, so the three set a pace that most people would have difficulty keeping up with, I am sure. Larry was leading the way, followed by Art, with Marcy bringing up the end of the small pack. The runners could hear the Alaska Highway 1 traffic below them as they climbed the mountainside. The trio were about 1.5 miles up the trail when they passed a particularly dense patch of brush that crowded both sides of the trail. Suddenly, Art heard the brush behind him violently erupt, and a brown blur emerged headed toward his grandmother. Marcy screamed in terror, and Art instinctively jumped off of the trail into a small ravine. The animal was moving so fast that Art couldn't tell exactly what it was, but he thought it was a moose. After a few minutes of solitary terror, he climbed back up to the trail and found his Uncle Larry, who told him to climb a tree. Larry stated he would be back and began anxiously jogging down the trail toward Marcy. Art climbed the nearest tree that would allow it and waited to hear back from Marcy and Larry with trepidation. After hiding in the tree for about an hour, neither of his relatives had returned to Art's location. Jim Blease heard Art's cries for help from the trail. Art explained that his relatives were attacked by a moose. As Jim approached the attack scene, he could hear faint moaning in the brush just off the trail. Following the moans, he came upon Larry. He was terribly injured and was near death. He managed to relay to Jim that a brown bear had attacked the two just moments before. He quickly ran down the trail and ran into 6 other hikers. 2 ran to notify authorities, while the remainder went to help Larry and Marcy. Around an hour later, state troopers and park rangers located the bodies of Marcy and Larry. They had been dragged about 30 yards off the trail, into the brush. Not far from their bodies was a moose carcass that the brown bear was guarding as a food cache. There were no bears located in the area at that time. Authorities waited until the following Saturday to recover Larry and Marcy's remains. After cordoning off the trail in search of the bear, their bodies were taken to the coroner's office, who noticed some peculiarities to their wounds. Their clothes were not torn, nor did either of them have puncture or claw wounds. Marcy died from trauma to the head and chest. They also noticed what they believed was a wound that was caused by a moose hoof on her back. Larry suffered trauma to the head and chest as well, but bled to death after his femoral artery was severed during the attack. Because Art thought quickly and fled the area, then sought safety in a tree, he was uninjured during the attack. He was left so traumatized by the event that he stuttered when spelling his relatives' names to authorities. Stephen Herrero, a professor at the University of Calgary, tracks all bear attacks since 1900. He says that fatal attacks occur about once a year in North America. He states that this attack was unusual due to the fact that 2 people were killed. Herrero also stated that bears will often run off if they know that people are nearby. His comments were contradicted by Sterling Miller, who is a research biologist from the state of Alaska. Miller states that when a bear is defending a food cache, they are frequently not deterred or scared away by humans. Experts state that Marcy and Larry were victims to a rare combination of factors surrounding their deaths. The bear that attacked and killed Larry and Marcy was never found, and authorities declined to randomly kill bears. They want conclusive evidence that the bear they killed was the same bear that killed Larry and Marcy. It is not only the brown bears along McHugh Trail that have had a history of exhibiting aggressive or dangerous behavior toward humans. On June 2nd of 2003, Jim Leslie was hiking while other families enjoyed barbecuing nearby when 3 black bears began to follow him. He had run into bears from time to time and had seen them disappear in panic at the sight of a human, but these bears followed him at a distance of about 100 feet. They were not scared of him at all, but kept their eyes focused on him as they quietly closed the distance between them and Jim. He was convinced that the bears were stalking him and were going to attack and eat him. The most substantial difference was that Jim was packing a .44 Magnum. He used his cell phone to call the police, who sent an officer to the trailhead. At one point, Jim told the dispatcher to hold on a minute as he fired a warning shot. One of the bears hurried a few feet up a nearby tree, but soon returned to the side of the others. 2 of the bears did not react to Jim's warning shot at all. Jim indicated that the wind was to his back, taking his scent to the bears, and he made lots of noise so they knew he was there. The bears were not popping their jaws or bluff charging him. They were simply silently closing the distance between them while staring at him. He fired another warning shot once they got closer, and all 3 bears scrambled into the forest at that point. The attack on Marcy Trent and Larry Waldron was the first fatal bear attack in the 25-year history of Chugach State Park. Authorities acknowledge that there is an unknown but high number of black and brown bears in the park, which abuts the city limits of Anchorage. There has never been any attempt to assess bear populations in the park. When authorities established a limited bear hunt near the park, a group called the Friends of McNeil River organized non-hunters and directed them to apply for the bear tags. This campaign limited available tags to just 2 to bear hunters, as the other 6 of 8 total were drawn by the group of non-hunters. After reviewing the information surrounding this episode, I am left with a few questions for you. Do you think that bear spray would have changed the outcome of this attack? Do you think bear bells may have alerted the bear to the presence of the joggers? Why do you think the bear let Larry and Art run by but attacked Marcy? Do you think the park has a responsibility to monitor bear numbers given how close the city of Anchorage is? How do you think Marcy and Larry could have avoided being killed in this brutal bear attack? I will be interested in reading your comments, so post them below in the comments section, and let's talk about it.
Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks.
Today's episode takes us back to a prior age when the New Hampshire Territory was still a frontier. The terrain here is still mountainous forested landscape with the classic New England deciduous foliage decorating the hillside. Stands of maple, oak, and birch trees composing a canvas that no human artist could justify. At the time, the area was habitat for white-tailed deer, wolves, moose, cougar, lynx, and bobcat. Most residents here were subsistence farmers, growing what they needed from small farms and ranches. The granite mountains here are not high by most standards, but the lifestyle at the time was still fraught with dangers seen and unforeseen. It was the evening of another warm summer day in New Hampshire. The year was 1785, and like nearly every other frontier family, the Leaches were still working hard to finish up their chores. Bradley Leach told his 8-year-old son Jonathan to take his horse up to the pasture and bring the cows back down for the evening. Jonathan was a smart boy and always did his chores, and Bradley was not worried about this last task remaining on the pair's chore list. Jonathan grabbed the reins of his trusted horse, Mr. Whipple, and started up the dirt road to the upper pasture. Mr. Whipple walked behind Jonathan and nipped at grass as he could reach it along the way. The light was just starting to fade, and the boy yawned with satisfaction at the completion of the day. A little bit about the area at the time of the attack. New Hampshire was sparsely populated, as it still is today. Run-ins with wildlife couldn't have been uncommon, as there were many different substantial predators living there at the time of this attack. Most people would have hunted deer, turkey, moose, and other animals to augment their food resources, and it is assumed the leeches were no different. Being so integrated into their natural surroundings was a part of day-to-day life, so the presence of an apex predator may not have been an unusual event. The pair had traveled about 300 yards to the last pasture when a black blur streaked from the wood line. The 3-year-old boar black bear had been watching the boy and his horse approach and had decided to attack. The bear was upon the pair so fast that the boy barely had time to glance up from the ground before the impact of the 225-pound predator. The bear clawed the boy in the face and the neck, and then pinned him down by the shoulders. Jonathan let out the loudest and most urgent cry for help he could muster. Mr. Whipple reared up on his hind legs amidst all the confusion and turned in circles out of conundrum. Mr. Leach was about 150 yards away in the next pasture and heard his son's distressed cries for help. He desperately sprinted the short distance to the fence row which separated him from his son. He clumsily crossed the fence and started after the bear, now grasping his young son by the throat. The bear dragged the boy back into the woodline by the time Bradley caught up to them. Bradley lifted the wooden stake he was carrying with him over his head and lowered it over the back of the beast. The bear spun around and stood on his hind legs to face the man. The bear's paws swiped menacingly at the man, now desperate to recover his son. The sharp teeth and claws of the bear proved too much for the man, and he was forced to retreat into the darkness, wrought with sadness and confusion. Mr. Leach rounded up the neighbors, and they agreed to wait until morning to pursue the man-killer, as pursuing it in the dark would be too dangerous. That night in the Leach home there was much crying and no sleep. As soon as the morning broke, the neighbors gathered in front of the Leach home, and the men all started to walk up to the attack scene. They paused at the initial attack site and witnessed the young man's blood in the grass, as well as the drag trail leading off into the bushes. The bridle the young man was leading the horse with was lying in the duff, as well as the young man's hat a little further on. They methodically followed the drag marks into the forest until they found the boy's remains. His thigh was completely eaten, and his neck and head were bitten severely. Suddenly, from behind a nearby log, the bear rose up and menaced the men with popping jaws and ferocious claws, ready to defend his kill. Almost in unison, the recovery party fired their firearms as 3 shots rang out in rapid succession. The bear tumbled to the ground, not far from the body of the beloved boy whose life it had just ended. Jonathan's remains were gathered up and brought back to the family home. His family mourned his loss, and they prayed as they laid him to rest on the family homestead. This is the oldest recorded bear attack in the historical annals of the state of New Hampshire. Some information about the eating habits of black bears in New Hampshire will help us understand the causes and relationships surrounding this episode. In this location, bears start the spring by feeding on grasses and other succulent plants, but by summer have moved on to eating berries, fruits, roots, and flower blossoms. By fall, they focus on nuts with high caloric value like beechnuts, acorns, and hickory nuts. Nearly year-round, they have very little meat in their diet due to the abundance of plant food resources. After reviewing the facts surrounding this episode, I'm left with a few questions. Do you think the bear stalked and killed Jonathan out of predatory or territorial motives? Do you think that Bradley should have fought to death to recover his son, even if he were already dead? Why didn't the father and son have a firearm nearby, given they lived in what was a frontier at the time? What could Bradley have done differently to make sure his family was safer? Do you think this attack may have been due to a bad berry crop? I will gladly read and reply to your comments, so please post your thoughts in the comments section below and let's talk about it.
Thank you for watching Scary Bear Attacks. If you've enjoyed this episode, please consider clicking on the like button and clicking on the bell icon. We'll help you know when we post our new episodes. Posting our video links to your social media profiles furthers awareness, and it's fun.
We slashed our prices in our merch store, linked below, so check out the bargains there while you shop. As a member of our human community, remember to adventure bravely and be careful out there, especially in bear country.